right. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to bring Dr. Ehrman on. I'll also bring on your slides as well, Dr. Ehrman, and you will have the same courtesy. You'll have 25 minutes. You can use all or most of that as much as you want, and I will not start the clock until you start your presentation. You might be muted. Make sure we're not muted here. Nope, still muted. Let me see if I can unmute your mic. Nope, I can't.
Here we go.
There
okay.
we go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to, before I start, I just want to say that was,
sure.
I think that was the most remarkable argument for the resurrection I've ever heard.
Wow.
I didn't understand a lot of it, so I'm looking forward to the cross-examination. Okay.
I'll say, don't say that. We might have to send Jonathan home early tonight.
No. He's got some questions to ask me. Okay, that's great.
I will start on your mark, Dr.
Thank you, Boy, I've never heard that one before. Okay, good. Okay, right. So can I advance my slides? Okay. I don't see.
We can double check them before you do.
No, I cannot advance my slides. I'm not able to advance my slides.
All right, let's make sure. Let's go on to the actual screen that you're sharing, not the StreamYard screen.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second. I need to go to my actual screen. Just a second.
Yes, sir. On the actual document.
I got
it.
Okay.
They are. They're moving.
You got it?
There.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Stephen, and for all of you who are coming here. So this is obviously a hugely important question that is relevant in our current time, since we are in Lent just now. Was Jesus raised from the dead? Historians and their sources. I'll start with my overall position, which is that belief in the resurrection of Jesus is a matter of faith. Christians traditionally have believed that Jesus was raised from the dead. It is not, however, a matter of historical proof for reasons that I'll be explaining in a little bit. If it was a matter of proof, if you could prove it historically, then it would not be a matter of faith. It'd be a matter of proof, of knowledge. When I say that that I know who won World War II, and I know who won the last Wimbledon tennis tournament, when I know things about the past, because I have very good evidence for it, I'm not saying that I believe it. Believing it is when you don't have the historical proof, as the Bible itself says. So I just think that's worth pointing out. I don't think you can prove that Jesus was raised from the dead. And if you were proving it, then it'd be a matter of historical fact, and there'd be no faith. Okay, well, that's just my opinion about that. Let me talk about how historians go about doing their work, because we're talking about something that happened in the past. And historians are the ones who try to establish what probably happened in the past. And so I think it's important for us to bear in mind what it is that historians do if we're going to talk about whether the resurrection is historical. What historians do. Historians examine material and literary evidence about the past. Most of the past we know about from writings. That's the literary evidence. Some of the past we know about from material remains, in other words, from archaeological discoveries and such. And those are our two main ways we access the past. Historians look at everything that survives that's of some relevance. They figure out, based on what seems to be reliable evidence and less reliable evidence, and what really is no evidence at all, they add it all up and they try to figure out what probably happened. What probably happened when the Allies won the Second World War. So you establish what most likely happened. What kind of evidence do historians look for when they're dealing with this material and literary? I'm going to stick with the literary, because when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, we don't have any material evidence. Nobody recorded, if he was buried in a tomb, nobody recorded where it was. Even the early Christians didn't have any discussion of that, where it was. So we don't have any material evidence at all, but we have literary evidence. And so what kind of literary evidence do historians look for when they're trying to establish what happened in the past? Well, they want contemporary accounts that were close to the time of the event. So they want writings that were done, near the time. Preferably, they'll get lots of those kinds of things, lots of records of something that happened. These records, if the best thing is when they're independent of each other. In other words, it's not that like you have 12 sources, but 11 of them got their information from one of them, then the 12 aren't independent. You're looking for independent sources, a lot of them if possible, that are contemporary or close to contemporary to the events. You want these sources to be consistent with each other. Even though one person didn't get his account from another author, the accounts are consistent with one another, even though they're independent. And you're looking for literary evidence that's not biased toward the subject one way or the other. If you have like people who are real fans of Julius Caesar talking about how amazing he was and he did this amazing thing and that amazing thing, or that Vespasian the emperor did this miracle or that miracle as he's recorded or doing by eyewitnesses. If the person is saying that because they want to flatter Vespasian, well, you'd prefer there was somebody who wasn't biased saying it. Okay, so when we're dealing with the resurrection of Jesus, our only sources that are independent sources that recount the events of the resurrection are from the New Testament. You'll notice that Jonathan didn't say anything about these people he was talking about from Plutarch onward actually referring to the resurrection. He's saying they didn't refer to the resurrection. Well, okay, so you have New Testament references, and you have later Christian authors who have read the New Testament references and who are basing their views on what they read in the New Testament. So what can we say about our New Testament sources? Just kind of generally about Jesus. Well, the good news is we have multiple sources. We have 4 accounts of the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So that's good. Those are 4 accounts of what Jesus said and did. How many accounts do we have of what other people said and did in the first century? Let alone first century Israel. How many accounts do we have of the historian Josephus by somebody else who's recounting his life, his words? None. How many do we have of Pilate? None. How many do we have of, just pick anyone. None. But with Jesus, we have 4. That's good. Sometimes they report things independently of one another. Sometimes John will have stories that are not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Sometimes Luke will have a story not in Matthew and Mark, etc. So sometimes they're independent. They often corroborate one another. They say things that are pretty similar about Jesus without having borrowed from one another. So that's good. So that's all good news when it comes to gospel sources about trying to know what Jesus said and did. I'll point out that one of the people that Jonathan quoted doesn't believe Jesus even existed. so the Richard Carrier that Jonathan was trying to use in order to help support his view that Jesus was raised from the dead, not only thinks Jesus is not raised from the dead, he doesn't think there was a Jesus. Okay, well, so most historians think that these sources are good enough to say, yeah, there was Jesus. We can say some things about him. That's good news. Bad news. When it comes to the Gospels as sources about what happened in the past, the Gospels are written 40 to 60 years after the events they narrated. And we don't have earlier sources for the words and deeds of Jesus, except for Paul, who reports 3 sayings of Jesus and, not much about what he did, except for the fact that he was crucified. And Paul believes he was raised from the dead. These authors who wrote these Gospels were not directly connected to the events they narrate. They were not speaking Aramaic the way Jesus and his followers were. They were not from Israel as Jesus and his followers were. They were not eyewitnesses to the things they testified to. These were the authors of the Gospels writing 40 to 60 or 65 years later, were literate Greek-speaking Christians decades later living in other parts of the world. They were not followers of Jesus during his lifetime, didn't know Jesus during his lifetime, and give no indication that they knew people who were living, who were eyewitnesses to Jesus' life during his lifetime. They are decidedly biased. These Gospels are called Gospels. They're not called histories. They're Gospels. Gospels means proclamations of good news. They're written by Christians for Christians to advocate a Christian message. So that doesn't mean they're wrong, but you have to take into account what somebody's biases are. They're written in different parts of the world. They are often dependent on each other. When it comes to the resurrection narratives, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, these are not 3 separate sources. Matthew and Luke are getting their accounts from Mark. They change it in places, but they're word for word the same in places. And that only happens with some kind of copying practice going on, as every critical scholar recognizes and agrees to. John may have used the synoptics. Matthew, Mark, and Luke may not have. I think probably not, but he's heard similar stories, certainly, even though they're told very differently. Frequently, these four accounts are strictly at odds with each other, like completely at odds with each other. The accounts that we find in the Gospels are based on oral reports that have been in circulation for all those decades. Most people could not read. Very few people could write. Almost nobody in rural Galilee was able to compose a narrative. We don't know of anybody, actually, from the first century who came from rural Galilee, like Jesus and his disciples, who could write anything, who could write a narrative. Don't know of anybody like that. Certainly fishermen weren't trained to write. No, there were not schools in rural Galilee for people to learn, let alone to learn in Greek. Didn't happen. These people, what happened is that people, after Jesus' death, people said he got raised from the dead, and they started telling stories about him. And one person told another person in Jerusalem, and then probably people traveled. They went up to Galilee, they told stories there, and people in Galilee maybe traveled over to Ephesus, told stories there. People in Ephesus maybe went over to Rome, told stories there. This is going on year after year after year, people passing these stories on by word of mouth. It's just the way it was. These stories got altered in the telling and retelling. We know they got altered in the retelling because we have firm evidence of it. Indisputable evidence that the stories got changed. Well, we know they got changed in the oral tradition. If you wonder about this, if you think, well, but I heard that like in ancient times, people had these really great memories. And, because most people were illiterate, the oral tradition was completely reliable. Ain't that the case? No, it's not the case. So I give an extensive evaluation of that, and I explain why in my book, Jesus Before the Gospels, if you want to see. It's not going to matter much for our purposes here. The probability is that when people tell stories, you may have noticed this, stories change. You may have had stories told about you, not 30 or 40 years later, but like the next day, that simply were not true. Somebody changed something. So you have those look, they always change. But we have proof that things changed because we have differences in our Gospels about the same thing, as I'll say in a few minutes. Paul is our first witness to the resurrection of Jesus. He's the first one. He doesn't record what happened at the resurrection, but he does say that he saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion. Let's consider the dates. The dates of the reports are, you get them, especially in 1 Corinthians and Galatians, two of Paul's letters, written probably between 55 and 60 years, 55 and 60 CE. So, sometime 25 or 30 years after Jesus' death, we have somebody who tells us that it happened. The event that Paul narrates of having seen Jesus appears to have happened maybe 3 or 4 years after Jesus' death. So if Jesus died around the year 30, there are reasons for thinking Paul converted by claiming he had seen Jesus about 3 years later. What reports does Paul give us? Well, he claims that he saw Jesus. That's the phrase he uses in the Corinthian correspondence. He says that Jesus appeared to him in Galatians and in 1 Corinthians. And so, okay, those are the reports. Things to note about Paul's report. I mean, he doesn't give us details. I'm sorry to say. I wish he did. Oh boy. Paul is emphatic that it happened. And he says that the disciples also saw him and that other people saw him. 500 people saw him at one time. So Paul says that, but we don't have reports from those people. So I'm just talking about the reports we actually have. Paul says it happened. He says other people saw him. I should point out that Paul never met Jesus during his lifetime. He would not have known what he looked like. He does not indicate how he knew it was Jesus. He saw somebody and he learned it was Jesus, and he believed it was Jesus. In the book of Acts, when you have the accounts of Paul's conversion in Acts, Jesus actually appears to Paul, and Paul actually has a few words with him. And so those accounts in Acts, though, chapters 9, 22, and 26, are internally contradictory to one another at numerous points, as you can see. So you have to ask, how reliable are witnesses that contradict each other? Good question. The gospel reports. Most of our information about the resurrection of Jesus come from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they agree on a number of important issues. They agree that Jesus was crucified on a Friday. They all say that he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. He's said in all four accounts to have been raised on the third day, on the Sunday. One or more women go to the tomb on the third day, on Sunday morning. The stone is either rolled away from the tomb when they get there, or it rolls away when they arrive. Jesus is not in the tomb. One or more men or angels are in the tomb. And the women learn that Jesus has been raised. Okay. That's what they agree on. So that part's good. Those are the stories that early Christians were telling about the resurrection of Jesus. All these points, probably. This is what people said about the resurrection, no matter whether you're in Ephesus or in Rome or in Jerusalem. They have these nuts and bolts about the story that they agree on, probably, I guess. We don't know if they agreed in Jerusalem and Rome because we don't have any records apart from these Gospels. But these Gospels are interesting, particularly because they can't agree with one another about the details in significant ways. Some of the differences are completely reconcilable if you work at it. Who went to the tomb on the third day? Well, was it one woman, Mary Magdalene and John? Was it Mary and another Mary, as in one of the other synoptics? Was it Mary and several other women, as in another one of the synoptics? Who was it? How many women was it? Who went? Well, you could reconcile it all if you wanted to. Say, well, some people are talking about one Mary and some about two Marys and some about also Salome. And so, you could reconcile that. Was Mary alone or with other women? If with other women, how many? What were their names? Well, it all depends which gospel you read. What did they see at the tomb? In one gospel, they see a man, Mark. In another, they see two men, Luke. In one, Matthew, they see an angel. In John, they see two angels. Well, which was it? Well, if you want to reconcile it, you say, well, they saw two angels and Matthew's only reporting one of them and Luke's calling them men and Mark's recording one of them saying he's a man. Okay, so you can reconcile that if you want. There are other things that are probably not reconcilable in these accounts. Was the stone rolled away before the women got to the tomb or after? 3 of the Gospels say before. Matthew says it was not rolled away before. It rolled away after they got there. Explicitly says it. Where was the man, angel, or angels sitting or standing? Depends which gospel you read. Was it inside the tomb? Was it on top of the stone? It was beside them someplace. Where was it? Well, depends which gospel you read. What were the women told to tell the disciples? The women are instructed to go tell the disciples. Are they told to tell the disciples to go to Galilee? Or are they told what Jesus said to them in Galilee? In Matthew and Mark, the women are told to tell the disciples to go to Galilee to meet Jesus there. In Luke, the disciples are told to stay in Jerusalem and don't leave it. And they don't leave it up to the day of Pentecost, 50 days later. In fact, they don't leave it in the book of Acts. So, did they stay in Jerusalem? Or did they travel 100 miles up north to Galilee? It's a difference. Did the women tell anybody or not? In Mark, the women are said, go tell the disciples this. And Mark's gospel ends by Mark saying they didn't tell anyone because they were afraid. Period. The gospel ends there. They didn't tell anyone. What about Matthew? In Matthew, they run off and tell the disciples. What about Luke? They run off and tell the disciples. What about John? They run off and tell the disciples. Matthew says, Matthew, Luke, and John say that. Mark says they didn't tell anybody. Did the disciples immediately leave and go to Galilee, as in Matthew? Or did they stay in Jerusalem for weeks, months, or years, as in Luke? Well, okay. I don't think you can reconcile these. So you've got accounts that basically agree on kind of major issues and can't get their story straight when it comes to any of the details. That's not good for sources. If you're in a court of law and you have witnesses that kind of basically say, yeah, there was this accident, but they don't agree on like anything about the details. Okay. Well, maybe it still happened anyway. In sum, what I'd say is that the Gospels do agree in major ways about the resurrection. Most of the time, they're not independent in what they have to say about it. They're highly contradictory in the details. None of them is unbiased or disinterested. None of these gospel accounts is written in order to explain history to historians. All 4 gospel writers are committed Christians who believe that Jesus got raised from the dead. They are committed to this belief. and they write accounts of him being raised from the dead that are contradictory to each other and that are not independent. They're writing this decades later in a different part of the world. They are not quoting eyewitnesses. They themselves were not eyewitnesses. What kind of sources are these? Well, it's good we have these sources, but are they really the kinds of sources that scholars are looking for? Not so much. Would these witnesses have been persuasive in court? Jonathan, my debate partner here, is trained in law. Would these witnesses be persuasive on a witness stand? I don't know. Be interesting to find out. The big problem I have with thinking that we can show that Jesus was raised from the dead historically is part of a larger issue that I want to address here as my final point. It has to do with historians and the problem of miracle. Let me return to what ancient historians can do. Some things they can do, some things they cannot. Ancient historians can look at whatever are the material and literary remains. That's what they do for a living. They determine what probably happened based on an analysis of these material and literary remains. Okay? What can they not do? There are lots of things that historians cannot do. Historians cannot use history to construct a house. Historians cannot do history in order to explain the Pythagorean theorem. They can explain how Pythagoras came up with it, but they can't do math with it. There are lots of things historians cannot do, even with things connected to the past. Historians cannot establish what probably happened for events that have no record. For example, what did your grandfather eat on May 3rd, 1971? There's no way to know. You might guess, but maybe you do have a record. I doubt it. But so a historian can't show, well, yeah, he probably did eat liverwurst that day. Yeah, so you can't establish things for which you have no record. Historians cannot explain events that happen outside of history. They study history. If something happens outside of history, it's not the provenance of historians. Okay? Historians can never establish that what never happens probably did happen. I'll just give you an illustration of what I mean. Historians are not scientists, but they do know that some things never happen. For example, the second law of thermodynamics requires increased entropy in any closed system. Entropy always increases, it never decreases. That's why you never have something cold making something else hot. It's part of the second law of thermodynamics. It's why if you take a cup of black coffee and you pour cream in it and you stir it, the cream gets mixed in. You can never make it mix out. You can stir it till doomsday. The cream will never be mixed out of the coffee. It can't happen. It has never happened. What if you have three people who say, yeah, but I saw somebody do it. I saw this guy stir that coffee and the cream came out. I saw it. Would you believe it? Well, if you believe it, then you haven't studied science, because I'm telling you, it cannot happen, and it never has happened. What's the probability that these three people actually did see it happen? Well, they might have thought they saw it happen. They might be lying about it. They might have been mistaken. They might have heard from somebody else that it happened. Did they actually see it happen? What's the probability? If something has never happened before, but somebody says they saw it happen, is it probable that it happened because the person said so? Or is it more probable that maybe they mistook what they saw, or that it was a magic trick, or that they heard it, or what's more probable? Do people mistake what they see all the time? Do people fabricate things that didn't happen all the time?
2 minutes.
Does the law of thermodynamics get broken? No. So what's more probable? We cannot access supernatural explanations for natural events. If we think that the reason the Allies won World War II because God intervened, that's fine. You can believe that if you want. But historians cannot prove that God intervened. Historians have only access to things that happen in this world. Well, you say, well, God intervened in this world. Well, historians don't have access to the divine realm. They have only access to what happens here. What are miracles? Miracles are the least probable thing if you believe they happen. The reason you call them miracles is because they never happen. Well, they sometimes happen. Okay, how often do they happen? How often does somebody walk on the water? Never. What if somebody did? Well, okay, it's a miracle. It's not likely, though. Historians can only establish what likely happened. The inevitable problem is that if historians can only establish what probably happened in the past, and by their definition, miracles are not probable, then historians can never show that the most improbable thing is probable. This is not an anti-supernatural bias that I have, or that historians have. It's how history works. I had this view when I was a believing Christian. I knew that you could not prove a miracle using the historical methods. You could believe it. You might think it's right. You might, but you cannot demonstrate it on historical grounds. There's a difference between theology and history and law. You can demonstrate some things through the law. You can demonstrate some things through history. Those things, those processes, legal processes and historical processes, cannot establish what God does. In the Christian tradition, Jesus did not have a near-death experience. God raised him from the dead. If you believe that God raised him from the dead, you have to believe in God. That's a theological belief, not a historical factum. And so historians can't show it. Okay, that's my conclusion. Good enough. Good enough. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ehrman.